What if I told you that Africa was first circumnavigated, completely sailed around, not by a European explorer, in a grand age of discovery, but by ancient mariners over 2,000 years before Columbus was even born? Here's what makes this story even more unbelievable. The man who ordered this mission wasn't a legendary admiral or a fearless captain. He was a pharaoh, and the sailors he sent weren't Egyptian. They were Phoenicians, the most skilled seafarers the ancient world had ever produced. They vanished into uncharted waters for 3 full years. No GPS, no maps of what lay ahead, no guarantee they would ever return. And when they finally came home, they reported something so strange, so seemingly impossible, that the greatest historian of the ancient world refused to believe them. But here's the twist. That one detail he dismissed as fantasy, modern science has proven it was absolutely true. This is the story of the first people to ever sail around Africa, and almost nobody knows their names. To understand why this voyage matters, we need to travel back in time, all the way to approximately 600 BCE, to the sun-scorched banks of the Nile River in the heart of ancient Egypt. Egypt, at this period, was ruled by Pharaoh Necho II, a king of the 26th dynasty, a ruler with an extraordinary and restless ambition. Necho wasn't content simply managing his kingdom. He was a visionary. He attempted to dig an early version of what we now call the Suez Canal. He modernized Egypt's military. He looked outward, toward the sea, toward trade, toward the edges of the known world. And one day, Necho II made a decision that would echo across history. He commissioned a fleet of Phoenician sailors to do something no human being had ever attempted, to sail completely around the continent of Africa. Now, the Phoenicians were the perfect choice for such a mission. Originating from the coastal cities of modern-day Lebanon, places like Tyre and Sidon, they were the undisputed masters of ancient navigation. They had already established trade routes across the Mediterranean, reaching as far as modern Spain. They read the stars, understood the winds, and built vessels designed to survive open ocean conditions. If anyone could pull this off, it was them. The fleet was provisioned, the orders were given, and somewhere along the northern shore of the Red Sea, the ships set sail, heading south into the unknown. What followed was one of the most extraordinary journeys in all of human history. But let's pause here for a moment, because it's easy to underestimate just how terrifying this mission actually was. These sailors had no chart of the African coastline. No one did. As far as the ancient world was concerned, Africa might stretch southward forever. There was no guarantee it even had an end. There was no Cape of Good Hope waiting cheerfully on a map. There was only ocean, wind, and coastline disappearing into the unknown. The sheer scale of the African continent is humbling even today. Africa is approximately 30 million square kilometers. Its coastline stretches for nearly 26,000 kilometers. Modern cargo ships with diesel engines and satellite navigation take weeks to complete the journey. These men were doing it in wooden vessels, powered entirely by oars and sail. Then there were the practical realities of survival. Ancient ships could not carry 3 years' worth of food and fresh water. Storms in the open Atlantic, which these sailors had never encountered, were violent and unpredictable. And beyond the physical dangers, there was a psychological burden that is almost impossible to overstate. Every mile they sailed south was a mile deeper, into a world no human had ever mapped. At some point, they would have been sailing waters where no ship had ever sailed before. No landmarks, no familiar stars in the expected positions, no way of knowing how far the continent extended, or if it ended at all. And yet, they kept going. That decision, repeated every single morning for 3 years, is the real miracle of this story. According to the account preserved by the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, writing approximately 150 years after the voyage, the Phoenician crew developed a remarkably practical system for surviving such a long journey. Each autumn, as the sailing season grew dangerous, they would bring their ships ashore along the African coast. There they would plant crops, wait for them to grow, harvest them, and only then return to the sea. This wasn't weakness. This was genius-level logistical thinking. They essentially created temporary agricultural colonies along the African coastline to keep themselves alive. Picture it, a crew of ancient Phoenician sailors, thousands of miles from home, farming an unknown African shore under unfamiliar stars, surrounded by landscapes no person from their world had ever witnessed. Dense tropical coastlines, desert stretches of burning sand meeting the sea, wildlife they had no words for in their language. They pressed southward along the eastern African coast, modern Somalia, Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique, waters that grew stranger and warmer. The stars above them slowly shifted. The familiar northern constellations they had used to navigate their entire lives began to sink toward the horizon. And then, at some point in their journey, they reached the southern tip of Africa, the place we now call the Cape of Good Hope, and they turned. They turned west, and then they turned north. And as they sailed westward along that southern coast, something happened. Something that confused them, something they would carry home and report to their Pharaoh, a detail so strange that history's greatest skeptic would refuse to believe it. As the Phoenician fleet rounded the bottom of Africa and began sailing westward, the sun appeared on their right-hand side. Their right, the north. For sailors from the Mediterranean world, this made absolutely no sense. In their entire experience of navigation, the sun always arced through the southern sky. It rose in the east, tracked southward and overhead, and set in the west. That was simply how the universe worked. It was as reliable as breathing. But now the sun was to their north. When they returned home and reported this, to Herodotus' sources, the great historian was unconvinced. He wrote it down, but he added a note of open skepticism. It simply defied everything he understood about the natural world. And for centuries, for millennia, this detail was treated as evidence that the story might be fabricated, a sailor's tall tale, an exaggeration, a myth. Then modern science caught up. When you are in the southern hemisphere, below the equator, traveling westward, the sun does not appear in the south. It appears in the north. That is simply how Earth's geometry works from that position. It is basic astronomical fact. The very detail that Herodotus doubted, the one he recorded with skepticism, as though it were the sailor's mistake, is now considered the strongest evidence that the voyage actually happened. Because a person making up this story in the Mediterranean world in 600 BCE would never have invented that detail. It would have made no sense to invent it. Only someone who had genuinely been there would report it. The sailors were telling the truth all along. The Phoenician fleet eventually passed through the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar, re-entered the Mediterranean Sea, and sailed home to Egypt. 3 years after their departure, they arrived back, carrying with them the greatest geographical knowledge any human being had ever possessed. They had proved through sheer endurance and courage that Africa was a continent entirely surrounded by sea, and then almost nothing. No monuments were built in their honor. No names were recorded for history. The Phoenician civilization itself would eventually be eclipsed. Carthage would fall. Egypt would be conquered. And the knowledge these sailors carried home gradually faded from the world's memory. Nearly 2,000 years later, in 1488, the Portuguese explorer Bartolomeu Dias became the first modern European to round the Cape of Good Hope, celebrated worldwide as a breakthrough moment in exploration. And in 1497, Vasco da Gama completed the full sea route to India. History books were written, statues were raised, nations claimed glory, but somewhere in the deep and silent record of human achievement, quietly preserved in a footnote of Herodotus, a crew of unnamed Phoenician sailors had already done it all before, with wooden ships, with hand-planted crops, with nothing but skill, stubbornness, and stars. Their voyage stands as one of the most remarkable achievements in human history, a testament to the fact that the desire to explore the unknown is not a modern invention. It is ancient. It is fundamental. It is who we are. Here's the question I want you to sit with, and I genuinely want your answer in the comments below. If the Phoenicians truly circumnavigated Africa in 600 BCE, what other ancient achievements might history have simply forgotten? Because this story should make all of us rethink what we assume about the ancient world and the limits of human capability. If this video opened your mind even slightly, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who deserve to hear these forgotten stories. Subscribe if you want more history that challenges everything you thought you knew, because we are just getting started, and next time, we are going deep into another lost chapter of ancient exploration, one that might completely reshape your understanding of who discovered what and when. Stay curious. The past is far more extraordinary than anyone ever told you.